So, like, first of all, like, can you introduce yourself for the coaches in Taiwan?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation, Eric. It's nice to talk to someone on the other side of the world. I looked at some of your previous podcasts, and it's you're doing a great job. So thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Appreciate
Well,
it.
my name is Håkan Andersson. I live in the northern Scandinavia in Sweden, not too far from the polar circle. And if you look out today, we're almost 20 below, and it's approaching 9 o'clock in the morning. It's still dark, so it's maybe not the best best situation in the world for developing sprinters, but we do our best. Well, I'm a former athlete myself on a national level. I'm a trained engineer, but I worked in the fire brigade for 36 years. And retired as a senior officer 5 years ago, and now I'm only working with sports. And I've always been intrigued by sprinting. It's first of all, it's very genetic and it's very difficult to develop. But everyone can develop with the right stimuli, with their own boundaries, of course. And I've been a sprint coach since around 1985. On elite level since the early 90s. I've been in and out of the Swedish national team. Been responsible for the National Federation sprint program for many years. And I've been very fortunate to coach some great athletes, and perhaps more important, some really great human beings. And I have formal education from the Federation, but I always like reading. I always like interacting with other coaches, both national and on international level. But I've always been very open with my ideas. I think it's a great way to start a relationship with others, I also worked, as a strength and conditioning coach, or maybe you should call it strength and speed coach in many other sports, very, very elite swimmers, some boxers, speed skating, soccer, ice hockey, you name it, in a lot of sports. And at the moment, I work at something called a high performance center in Växjö, and where we are consulting about 32 professional teams in various sports, and also some individual athletes, mainly in track and field, mostly with advising coaches and lecturing about sprinting and strength. I'm also responsible for the testing lab, and on top of that, I'm still doing some coaching. I presently have a promising group of junior sprinters, hurlers, and jumpers in my hometown. So that's a brief introduction about myself.
So, quite a journey. Is there like any certain time that coaching is kind of bored for you?
Well, I like to I'm a pretty curious person, and there is so much unexplored when it comes to athletics. In many senses, I feel we're still in the dark ages. There's so many things we don't know. So I think it's every day is a new adventure, and just to be able to work with young athletes, keep you young in heart. And I definitely have less years ahead than the past, but I still truly enjoy working with sports. And if I didn't, I would have stopped long time ago.
Cool. So I'm going to jump into the questions, okay?
Sure, yeah.
So, you mentioned that you coached sprinting for a long time. So, for like training athletes, like acceleration, is there like certain things you're gonna be looking at?
Well, if we angle it from a sprinter's view, everyone knows that a sprinter accelerates with a very inclined body position. And we know that the ground contact times are long, and due to where you place your foot in relation to your center of gravity, you have very, very little braking forces, coming out of the blocks. And that means that, you can produce, great horizontal force, and there is an extreme acceleration initially. And we know that the elite sprinters, they leave the blocks, close to 4 meters per second. But already at the second step, the horizontal velocity exceeds 6 meters per second, which is 50% of the maximum velocity for most sprinters. So the acceleration is enormous, and that has a lot to do with the how you orientate your force production and that you have a very inclined body position. But we must also understand that if you take Usain Bolt for an example, when he ran his world record, he accelerated for almost 67 meters. And for maybe a elite football player can accelerate maybe 30 meters. But you must understand that not two steps are identical when it comes to acceleration. So it's very important, if you take about a brief things, it's very important with your neutral pelvis, of course, and ability to create space between the foot in the air and the ground, so one can attack the ground from a high position rather than just dropping the foot to the ground. And we must look at where you plant the foot in relationship to center of mass. If you plant too far ahead of a center of mass, you produce unwanted braking forces, and of course the acceleration is going to be less. We also have to look at the rotation of center of mass around the foot from early to late stance. Too early extension of the hip and knee, and you will project forces too vertical, and you get less acceleration as well. And I think it's pretty, it's been, pretty popular to talk about, shin angle and torso angle lately, and I think it makes a lot of sense, since these angles, they show us briefly, the direction one is producing the propulsive force at any given time. And at the early stance, at the first foot contact, these angles are almost identical, and they're usually around 35 to 40 degrees for sprinters. But then you will see when you accelerate that the shin angles, at early stance rises gradually, up to maybe the 6 to 10 steps, 15 to 20 meters. And the torso angles rises, a little longer, maybe 20, 30 meters, 18 to 15 steps, little bit dependent. Both, hip, knee, and calf muscles are prime movers in acceleration, but with a low shin angle, the knee extensors can effectively produce horizontal propulsive forces, which is very, very beneficial for acceleration initially. And the ankle, too, has to be very rigid. They have to be able to transfer force onto the ground. But perhaps it's better to talk about a stiff, dynamic, elastic deformation, because it's not complete stiff. There is some elasticity involved. But if it's too weak, you're going to collapse, and you're going to put a lot of stress on your Achilles tendon. And it usually means that you're going to, hit the ground in early acceleration with your heel, and you're going to produce less horizontal propulsion and more vertical, and you have to involve your hip extensors more, maybe a little bit too early.
Cool. So you mentioned that there's gonna be like you have to look at those like hip position and the shin angle, the body angle. So can we start, and also the steps, right, at the acceleration phase? So when it comes to like the first, let's say the first three steps or the first 5 steps, is there like certain like distance you're gonna be like letting your athlete to like just place the foot on?
Well, first of all, when it comes to acceleration and track and field overall, I feel that technique, mechanics are more important than great physical capacity in the gym. It might be some correlation between the first step and your squatting, but onward the correlation drops very significantly, because it's everything is different, you know. And when you talk about acceleration, especially in terms of sprinting, a 100-meter sprint, I think you have to be patient, you know. You have to be patient. You have to realize you're not running 10 meters, you know, you're running 100 meters. And you don't want to overemphasize stride frequency, you know. Stride frequencies, you must know too, in sprinting is more or less constant, and after the second step, but there's a relationship between contact time and flight time that shifts. So if you hear, you know, a change of rhythm and acceleration, it sounds like you know, actually that the, you know, frequency is increasing, but it's actually the contact time that is decreasing, but the frequency doesn't change too much. You must also understand, you know, that you know, triple extension, you know, coming out of the only exists, you know, coming out of the blocks, you know, you should more emphasize on the fast scissor movement, you know, quick, you know, hip flexion and extension, you know, that the scissor movement up and down. And we must also look at the, you know, sprinting from a three-dimensional perspective. We got to look at if there is a rotation of arms and legs, and if there is, try to figure out why there is some. And unlike, you know, upright sprinting, you know, where the sprinter usually hit the ground on the edge of the foot on the fifth metatarsal, you know, and roll over to the big toe. In initial acceleration, if you look from behind, you know, the feet are usually much greater apart, and the ground contact happens actually on the big toe side of the foot if you have a you know, good mechanics. So you can't roll on the fifth metatarsal outside. You can't be too bow-legged to sprint fast, you know, when it comes to acceleration in particular.
How about like stride length? You mentioned like stride frequency. How about like stride length?
Well, when it comes to stride length, you know, it grows gradually, you know, during the race. You know, from an upright position, you're more or less, you know, you can divide the stride length from, you know, contact length and flight length. You know, it's how far do you move your center of gravity in stance? How far do you move your center of gravity in flight? And the sum of those are actually, you know, the stride lengths, and it builds up, you know. And on elite level, you know, it's definitely the higher correlation between, you know, stride length and finishing time than stride frequency and finishing time. You know, we all know that you know, Usain Bolt at his prime, you know, he covered 100 meters with less than 42 steps. But I think we're yet to see anyone that runs under 10 seconds with more steps than, you know, 48. Whereas you have a lot of sprinters running in the, you know, 1040, 1050 to 1060 range with, you know, 49, 50, even 51 steps, you know. So that's usually the limitation. And yeah.
Cool. So that's the things we are gonna be looking at when we train like acceleration. How about things like you're gonna look at when you train like max velocity?
Well, you know, when it comes to max velocity, you know, of course, we subjectively look at, you know, rhythm and relaxation. You know, it's very hard to measure, but it's something that, you know, most sprinters like to communicate around. And I usually say, when it comes to sprinting, you have to dare to think 98%. You know, if you try to push 100% the entire way, you usually lose your rhythm and the relaxation. So, you know, relaxation is probably key. When it comes to, you know, to maximum velocity, that only happens a very, very few steps, actually. If Usain Bolt, you know, hit his maximum velocity at 67 meters, you know, maybe he could maintain maximum velocity maybe 4 or 5, 6 steps, you know. After that, even him starts to decelerate, you know. But you got to look at the you know, one's ability to create vertical forces. We like to see a high hip position, And a very acute shin angle at touchdown. It means that the braking forces are more vertical orientated than negative. And we like to look at the thigh and heel position of the swing leg in relationship to the stand leg at mid stance. You want to see how well they're stepping over the knee with the free leg. We like to look at the extension of the hip and knee and ankle joint at takeoff. Too much extension usually means overstriding. Not very effective. It's better to start a new step rather than doing that last extension, because it's very it's a position where you can't produce a lot of force. So. Like I said, with modern technology now, with IMU sensors and contact grid and so on, we can look at stride length, stride frequency, contact time, flight lengths, contact lengths, flight lengths, and so on. And it's something that we've been starting to look at lately is an index between contact length and leg length. And we have found, and I communicated this with Ken Clark, a smart American coach scientist, that if you have an index of below 0.95, you're orientating your forces to vertical. And if you have an index over 1.1, usually means you're overstriding. So these are kind of some of the things we're looking at when it comes to maximum velocity.
Cool. So kind of want to go back to like the acceleration phase. When I listened to the podcast you did with Joel Smith, you mentioned that when when track guys doing their acceleration, there's going to be 3 phases of acceleration. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, you're going to see at the initial acceleration where it's a great lean of the upper body, and the shin angle, those angles are also very low. You can produce a lot of force also, with your knee extensor. So the motor for acceleration is both the hip and the knee and the ankle joint. But then you come to the point where you have a acute angle of the shin, but you still have some leaning of the torso. Means that part of the acceleration is putting a lot more stress and emphasis on the hip extensors. The glutes and the hamstrings are more important there. But then you come to an upright position about 30 meters, where you're still accelerating, but you can only do that by minimizing your contact time. Produce a greater impulse, by creating, because the forces are much more vertical orientated than the initial acceleration. So those are how I look at the 3 phases for acceleration up to maximum velocity.
So is there certain range of distance that goes in the first phase of acceleration, second phase, and the third phase?
Well, it's very much dependent on the athlete. Some athletes are very hip dominated. So they are, you can take an athlete like Justin Gatlin and so on, that maybe place their foot a little further out in relationship to their center of gravity and use their hip extends a super strong glutes and hamstring to accelerate. Then you have maybe a soccer player, football players that accelerate from an upright position. So he also has to use his hip extensors more for acceleration, because he's accelerating from a standing position. So he can't get into that very favorable position for horizontal propulsion and using the hip knee extensors for horizontal force production, because of the nature of that game. So it all depends on the type of athlete and what kind of sports you're involved in, I guess.
Cool. So while we're still talking about acceleration, I noticed that you combine a lot of resistance sprinting in your training. So
Resistance sprint, if we talk about specificity, I think it's almost impossible to be event specific at the gym because everything is totally different. You can be muscle specific in the gym. You can work the muscles you think is essential for your event. But when it comes to the gym, it's very, very difficult to be event specific. But resisted sprinting or hill sprinting is probably one of the few methods that resembles the normal sprinting. And I see, resisted sprinting is a technical tool, because if you resist an athlete maybe down to, 50% of his maximum velocity, his body position is going to be the same as the first step in sprinting, but from a longer way. So if you resist a person, with resistance, you have that body incline, you have that shin angle that resembles the first step, but you can train the first step for more steps in one go. So, and that's how I see it. And also like contrast training, I like to do some, maybe resisted the sprinting, to get them into the right position, get some potentation, for an unloaded sprint. And maybe also, combine the, resisted normal sprinting with assisted acceleration, those three combinations. And with modern technology today, with the Dynaspeed or the 1080 sprint, that are similar. And we can do these things, very effectively. We've been using, different devices since the 90s, and they work fine. We build, machines for both resistance and assistance, but now we can get cinematic data instantly and see what, how things are going on a better scale, So, things are really, really happening now in sprinting with the help of modern technology, I feel.
That's great. So, when you mentioned that, you're probably gonna use like 50% of velocity decrement, how like in terms of weight, how heavy is that going to be?
Well, if that is only one snapshot, because we use many different loads. I just took that as an example. If you resist a person with maybe 30% of the body weight with these machines, we'll slow them down to approximately 50. But with these machines, if you translate that to maybe sleds, then you have to double it with a sled.
Cool. So
I don't believe much in the concept of training at maximum power, because we all know, that if you talk about horizontal forces that we are measuring with these kind of machines, that the maximum force are produced, at the first step, and maximum powers occurs within, maybe half a second. So maximum power occurs within half a second. I don't believe, that it, working at that load that corresponds to maximum power is going to help you through the whole acceleration. It might be beneficial for part of the acceleration, but not the whole. That's a concept I haven't jumped out on, at least.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the post you post like yesterday about like plyometric, and when you learned plyometric, your teacher said they should be probably doing like strength training like twice their body weight. So what are your thoughts on like plyometric and like max strength?
Well, yeah, that's a very complex issue. That when it comes to training, we have to overload in some way. And we know that vertical forces are very, very important in sprinting. That the vertical forces for the best exceeds 5 times body weight, and that is from a very stiff position. You don't when the best land, they don't the amortization phase is very short. They don't sink. They sink just a couple of millimeters. So stiffness is very important, and it's a very stiff stretch shortening cycle. I think jumping is very effective. It is very neural. It probably targets your fast motor units. It definitely develops stretch shortening. It doesn't. You don't gain muscle mass. It definitely develops many qualities that are beneficial for sprinting. But one must remember it's very taxing. And it's not the only training that matters. If jumping ability was the most important for sprinting, then jumpers would be the best sprinters, and they're not. And if strength would be the most important, maximum strength would be the most important thing for sprinting. The weightlifters and powerlifters would be the best. Or if flexibility would be the most important, then the gymnast or the ballet dancer would be the fastest sprinters. But it's a combination of all. But I think plyometrics is great, but I think it should start at a very early age. I think it can be dangerous to start. Heavy athletes are 25 years old, they've never done any jumping, and you put them to a plyometric regime, where the landing forces, are way exceeding what they've ever been exposed to before. And I don't know where this idea comes from. You shouldn't start plyometrics until you can do, you can squat 2 times your body weight. No one seems to know where it comes from, but everyone heard it. But when it comes to 2 times body weight, in the gym, I mean, that is mainly, your concentric ability, in a slow contraction is super different from jumping or sprinting, So I don't think you're going to be, very safe, by doing a lot of weightlifting before, starting your plyometric regime. But I think you have to take it gradually, I think you should start jumping at a very, early age to learn the technique and, build the resilience, build the elasticity, of non-contractile elements. So I think it's very potent, but it can also be very, very dangerous if you're not doing it in the right way, Just as heavy weightlifting is also very, very potent, it's very easy to gain muscle mass that sometimes unwanted when it comes to many other events in athletics, including sprinting. So it's a very complex issue.
So is there like certain number if you're going to train like sprinter? Is there like certain like numbers of body weight or certain number you're going to let them like here's the way I want you to like be squatting? Past this way, you let's just do like squatting once a month or that kind of stuff. Is there like certain number of that?
Well, I think I see as, when it comes to squatting and all this, it's more general qualities that everyone can benefit from. I think everyone should do resistance training, And as a youngster, there is definitely, you're going to transfer from developing, muscle mass and maximum strength to sprinting, But it's a very diminishing return, and you can't say there is a certain number, there are very slender, elastic type of sprinters, even on world class that barely squats. They're still very, very fast. Well, then there are the more, muscular, maybe bulldog-looking guys that thrive on heavy resistance. So I think it depends what kind of athlete you are, And those really, heavy muscular guys, maybe they don't feel comfortable with jumping, especially if they haven't done it at an early age. versus those slender elastic guys, they usually love it, and they respond very well from it. So everyone is different, and I don't think there is any training regime that fits everyone. You have to see what kind of athlete you're having in front of you, and where he's in terms of his career, his training background, his events and so on. It's you have to try to analyze, the athlete you're working with and see what we're going to benefit the most from. And then, it's always this discussion: are you going to emphasize your weakness or your strength? And I think when you're a young athlete, I think you can work a lot of your weaknesses as well. But once you get more and more elite, it usually pays off a lot better to further develop your strength, your best qualities. So as always, there's a lot of depends when coaches answer questions.
Yeah. So since we're talking about like resistant training, I saw that on your like Instagram or Twitter, there's like you put your athlete on some kind of device, like some kind of rack, and you kind of like mimic the acceleration steps. And there's another video like kind of mimic the way that the hamstring do when it comes to max velocity. For those kind of video, what are these training?
Well, I understand it. I understand that people get confused. Like I said before, I don't think you can be event specific in the gym, regardless if it looks like a sprinting stride or not. Because everything is so different. The type of muscle contractions are different. The force production time is different. Everything is different. But one thing I think is important in sprinting, is the hip extension. So, these machines, I put on my Instagram account, there's a machine we built already in 1993 that allows, unilateral hip extensions. You can, in the last couple of years, it become, popular to do hip thrust, but I think personally hip thrust is the most uncomfortable exercise on earth, to put 200 kilos on your hip and do hip extensions. I like this a lot more, and I also think that it can be beneficial to work unilaterally when it comes to certain exercises, especially when it comes to developing the hip muscle. So those kind of machines has been around for a long time. I got inspired by a mentor of mine, Jan Melén, that came up with the idea. And at the beginning, I didn't have the money to buy the machine from him. So I welded one machine myself in 1993. And so you see two different machines that almost identical, but they are a little different. The one machine I built myself means you can go into a lower position and get more full range of movement when it comes to the hip extensions. Versus Jan's machine is a little bit more shorter muscle contractions in terms of length when change of center of mass. But in the gym, also I don't think the muscles don't really care if you're upside down, lying on the side, or up, wherever you are. It only feels the resistance, so you can build strength, and then you build the specific strength on the track. And plyometrics may be something in between, but the change of contact times are waning. When it comes to horizontal jumping, the contact lengths are long. When it talks about vertical jumping, because of the nature, you can do bilateral jumping, you know, they can produce force with both legs. You can, you know, produce maybe, force in a little bit shorter time. But on the other hand, you don't move your central gravity, you know, as long as you're doing sprinting. So in sprinting, you change your central gravity maybe 1 meter in the stance phase, and you're not going to do that in most vertical jumps.
Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to jump in the next topic, which I kind of want to ask is like, how would you program like the weekly layout for like sprinters?
Yeah, I think almost all year round, you know. Of course, we have a period where we do some more general work. You know, if you have maybe competition period of 3 or 4 months in a long year, most physical qualities are rather low, except maybe sprinting ability. So we do some general work, you know, for a period, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. We try to be outside as much as possible and do less intensity training and start to build up, you know. But it doesn't mean it, you know, it mustn't be too long, you know, because then you're doing, you know, general training for what, you know. So I think you have to be, if I compare to what we're doing now than when I was sprinting myself in the early 80s, you know, our general preparation phases are usually much shorter. Now we do more specific work. And so a typical microcycle will probably involve one session where you emphasize acceleration, one session when you emphasize more upright running, you know, more short, more, you know, maximum velocity sprinting, and one session where you emphasize speed endurance. And if you're going for indoor, you know, you heavily emphasize acceleration, of course, because 60 meters more or less only acceleration, and you gradually develop more and more, maximum velocity the closer to the outdoor season you get, and of course 60 meter indoors. It's no speed endurance at all, but we still do endurance work, you know, because I feel you need that. Very easy to reach a speed plateau if you're only doing short sprints. So I like to do a little longer runs too, you know, for relaxation, you know, on other reasons as well, you know. So I think, you know, when in terms of sprinting maximum velocity, we go from a, you know, classical, short to long approach. When it comes to the endurance side, maybe you can talk about it going from long to short, you know, and sometimes in the spring they meet each other.
So for those sessions, like acceleration session, like upright running and speed endurance, is it like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday?
Well, it depends on the period, you know. If you're close to the competitions period, when you're running, all those runs are probably going to be high intensity. I feel that 7 days is too dense. So if you talk about, more general periods, you can fit in those sessions within 7 days. But when you start to prepare for the competition session, we usually use periods are maybe 9 to 10 days to get more air in between the sessions and more rest, and so you can run with higher qualities. So how we usually do it.
Yeah. So then, how do you put, like, since it's, let's say, in the general preparation, you put like three sessions in a week or in 7 days, and more towards to like the track meet or the competition, you're gonna be microcycle these kind of 3 sessions in like 9 or 10 days, right? So, and besides the sprinting, how do you put in the weight training in when it's GPP and gradually toward the competition?
We usually use two strength training sessions a week, and we usually combine them with jumping or other type of explosive work, and usually do 1 day of sprinting, you do 1 day of strength training, and then 1 day of recuperation, and so you repeat it like that. And in the general preparation, the highest intensity sprinting you do in the work is probably the acceleration. So the start the microcycle with that, and maybe you have the the 60 or 80 meter repetitive runs, in the middle, you end up with the speed endurance. But when you come closer to the competition period, maybe you start with the maximum velocity training, and you have the acceleration in the middle or at the end, dependent on if you're preparing for outdoor or indoors. And closer to competition period, you usually mix qualities too. So one session can be both acceleration, maximum velocity, and speed endurance. And the same thing during the competition period too. They tend to be much more mixed. And maybe too, you can end up a sprint session with lifting, so you have a kind of a dual session, dual day, with both sprinting and lifting, jumping in 1 day to get more rest and recuperation in. So depending on your competition schedule, I guess.
Yeah. So I know there's some track coaches that are gonna put like sprinting and heavy lifting on the same day, and you also mentioned this, but you also talk about like divide it into like two, sprinting and heavy lifting in 2 days. So in what kind of situation you're gonna put sprinting and heavy lifting the same day, and what kind of situation you're gonna put in like sprinting, and you can divide it into 2 days?
Well, usually when you want more rest, you want to have more complete rest, usually in the competition period or just before the competition period. I like to do a dual session, because then the strength training is very much not developing anymore. It's just that you want to maintain, so you need very, very little. So as strength and jumping session can maybe be only 10 or 15 minutes. So you just round up the sprint session with some resistance work.
Cool. So you also mentioned that when you divide into like 2 days, you're probably gonna combine jumping with heavy lifting. So is that for athletes, is that probably going to be too much of a plyo, too much of a like ground contact?
But we usually, I like to sandwich the resistance training. I like to start the session with jumping, horizontal jumping most of the time, and I feel the athletes are usually more ready to lift heavy, and then you end up, with some more vertical jumping after, to regain some of the elasticity you lost during the lifting, part of it. But our lifting is not, we do lift heavy. Some athletes at least do lift heavy, but there is not a lot of reps, and it's not a lot of exercises. And I do like, the Olympic lifting, for most athletes, but it's the same thing there. If their technique is good or not, depends on what they've been exposed to as a youngster. Oi. Sorry. So a little bit dependent on what they've been exposed to when they grow up, if they're good lifting technique or not.
Cool. So last question before I let you go, okay? So I know when sprinting, there's probably gonna be a lot of like hamstring injury when we train our athlete to sprint. So how exactly do you minimize the chance for our athletes to get like sprain in their hamstring?
Well, it's $1 million question. If I knew the answer to that, I would be a rich man on YouTube. It seems like, the hamstring has surpassed, ACL injuries in the Premier League, and it's costing billions a year in the Football Federation. But I think in my sport, I think we have less hamstring. They do occur still, but we have less hamstring injuries now than I was a sprinter myself. And I think the main difference is that, today we do more high intensity running all year round. So the hamstrings are, always exposed to those kind of work. So it's no surprise when it comes to May, when you suddenly start to sprint maximum. So I think it has to do with, some part of his preparation. You also do more specific, strength training for the hamstring than we did in the 80s and the 70s. Then, we only did more or less hamstring curls. It's maybe not a good idea to only do that. I think technique is also important. When you talk about hip position, if you have the lordosis or not, it's gonna put stress on your hamstrings. So there's many, like I said, there's many different reasons why it happens. But I think it's less of a problem now than it was, at least when I was a sprinter, 40 years ago.
So you said that when you're sprinting, there's a lot more hamstring injury than it is now. And you mentioned that it is probably because that they do a lot of high intensity sprinting all year round, like now. So does that mean that you think that we should probably expose our athlete to a little bit microdose this kind of element into the training all year round?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a problem in soccer and football too, because they are so scared of hamstring injury that they don't dare to expose the players to longer, fast sprints in training. So the first time they're going to be exposed to it is the end of a half in a game. So that's why they get hurt. In that end of the halves, when they're tired, techniques deteriorate, and if they try to sprint fast with a fatigue muscle, and you haven't been exposed to it before, it's a great hazard, I think.
Yeah, cool. So that's probably all the questions I have for today. Okay, so if there's any coaches are interested in what we are talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
Well, I have an account on Instagram and on the Twitter, that I sometimes put up some ideas. I think it's a good way of getting criticized and to think about what you're doing and so on. It's I enjoy that.
Cool. So, what is it all Håkan Andersson?
No, it's Sprint Coach, SWE on Twitter, and it's Sprint Coach on Instagram.
Cool. Appreciate it.